Welcome to segment 2 of Literacy Strategies for Paraeducators. Last time we talked about what you could do before the students began to read. We talked about teaching them the pronunciation of difficult words. But as all of you know, one of the challenges that your students have is that in many cases they don't understand the meaning of important words. Many of our struggling readers have very low vocabularies, and so every story that we read, every chapter that we read with them, we need to pre-teach them the meaning of really critical words. Why is this so important? Well, one, again, is comprehension. If I don't understand the meaning of the words, I am going to have difficulty having access to the content. And as we already said, many of your students don't even come to school with large vocabularies. So all of us have to work to add to those vocabularies. So how are we going to go about doing this? Well, it does require that you read the story beforehand to pick out some words that you're going to give formal instruction on. Some words you'll just tell the kids the meanings as you come to it when you're reading the story. But there's a few words, maybe 2 or 3, that you say, I am going to formally teach these before we read the passage. And what kind of words should you look for? Well, first, it would help if you pick words that are unknown to the children rather than known. One day I was reading with students, and in the book it told to teach to the third graders the word secret. I knew that all of them knew secret, but in the story was the word contagious, and I knew right away that that was a word that would be unknown to them, but they'd really have to understand the story. So first, words that are unknown. Second, you want to pick words that are critical to the story. Since you're only going to pick 2 or 3 very limited choices, they have to be ones that really are critical to the plot or to understanding the science, social studies, or health material. But I really want you to attend to the third big idea here. Not just unknown words critical to the content, but words that students could say in the future, words that children could hear in the future, words that students could read in the future. That we really want to focus on words that are often referred to as academic words, meaning that a mature person would use them, hear them, read them in many situations, many different domains. We want to focus on those. In the work by Isabel Beck, she talks about 3 tiers of words. The first tier of words are words such as clock, radio, bed. And those words you probably don't even need to teach your children because they're already in their repertoire. The second tier is the ones we want to focus on. Words that are very high frequency words that are used in many different situations. For example, the word fortunate is a word that would be a tier 2 word, an academic word that kids would hear many times in the future. Or a word like absurd. Given that life is basically somewhat absurd, you hear it all the time. So students would hear it, they could even use it. Ooh, this activity is a little absurd. No, they wouldn't do that. So we could teach them words that they could use in the future. So we wouldn't spend a lot of time on tier 1, but a lot of time on tier 2. And the third tier are words that are very low frequency and used in a very limited spectrum. For example, the word tundra. Now, you know, it's hard to incorporate tundra into your daily speech. You do not go around and say, ooh, what do you know about the tundra? Do you live on the tundra? So that's a word that, though quite technical, and you have to briefly teach, but you don't want to spend a lot of time on because it's not a word that the students are going to hear, say, or use in the future. So particularly tier 2 words. So when we go through a passage, we're going to pick out just 2 or 3 unknown, critical to the content, and words that students can use in the future. So how should we teach these words? Well, the students do need to know the meaning of them. And there's sort of 2 possibilities. One possibility for getting a definition to teach children would be for you, before you ever taught it, to take those 2 words, look the word up in the context, or look them up in the glossary. That's the best source because it'll be defined just as it's used in that book or in the dictionary. But here's the problem with dictionary or glossary definitions. Many of them are very succinct, short, that's their goal, and accurate, but they don't communicate at all to your students. So after you look them up, take a moment and think, how could I give a student-friendly definition that students would actually get? So I just did a few of these. So I looked up one day when I was teaching the word exhausted. And here's what the dictionary said. To use up wholly, to tire or wear out. And I said to myself, now that's accurate. To use up wholly, to tire or wear out. And yet many of my students wouldn't get it from that wording. So I used the kind of student-friendly definition that Isabel Beck's research would suggest, saying something like this. Exhausted means feeling so tired that you can hardly move. After a reading lesson, you are exhausted. You are so tired that you can hardly move. And that would be understood by the students using language that they already had. So one possibility is to, before the lesson starts, if you have time, to look the word up and then write down a friendly definition that you could convey to students. But you know, as a busy paraeducator, sometimes you could pick out the words, but you really don't have time before the lesson to look up the words, and so here's an option that all of us could use. So you've identified the words before the kids are going to read the passage, and you actually have them with you. Locate the word in the glossary, locate the word in the context clues, if it's in a science or social studies or health book, or even look it up in the dictionary. And then have them read the definition or read it to them, and then restate it on the spot. So you'll have to be very bright at that moment in a student-friendly way. So for example, maybe the story word is the word reluctant. So we turn to the glossary, we look up reluctant, and this is what the glossary says. Feeling or showing aversion, hesitation, or unwillingness. Well, you know, right away you know your students aren't going to get it from that glossary definition. They don't know what aversion is, hesitation, or unwillingness. So the definition actually uses 3 words that they wouldn't know. So then you have to say to them, in student-friendly language, what it would mean. So you say to them something like this. Well, reluctant means that you're really not sure you want to do it. So reluctant means that you're not sure that you want to eat that strange food on the plate. Reluctant means that you're not sure you want to raise your hand and volunteer an answer in class. So you're reluctant. So you could do it one of 2 ways. Look it up beforehand, write a student-friendly definition, one they'll understand. Or have them with you find the definition, dictionary, glossary, context clues, and then restate it. But what do we know about all learners of language is one exposure is not enough. Even after you've told them a student-friendly definition, many of your kids are not going to remember for eternity the meaning of reluctant or exhausted. Maybe exhausted because they are, but no. And so you've got to go one step further, and you have to give them multiple practices of the meaning of the word. So another option would be to ask your students questions using what we call examples and non-examples. In this case, something where you're reluctant and not reluctant, and have them make a discernment. Are you talking about reluctant or not? Now, this takes a little more thoughtfulness. In fact, you probably would have to think about it beforehand, but once you've done this 20 times, you'll get really good at it.
We're going to learn a new word. The word is reluctant. Meaning is when you don't really want to do something. I'm going to give you some sentences, and you let me know whether the sentence has the meaning reluctant or not. A first grader who runs into the class.
Not reluctant.
What about this next sentence? A first grader who stands by the door and doesn't want to come in.
That's reluctant.
A student who won't ever raise his hand.
Reluctant.
A little boy who only puts one toe in the swimming pool.
Reluctant.
A little boy who dives into the pool.
Not reluctant.
So another option would be to ask the students questions that make them really think about reluctant. And again, this is one you might have to think about beforehand. Okay, get ready, you're my students, and think about good answers here. So I ask you, why might a person be reluctant to eat a new food? Well, here's what your kids would say when you call them one of them. Well, maybe the food looks bad, or maybe it isn't going to feel good in my mouth, or maybe it smells bad. That would make you reluctant to have that food. Or I might ask, well, why might a student be reluctant to come to, let's say, first grade? I don't know what's going to happen in first grade. I am scared to come to first grade, thus I am reluctant. So the students have to think of the meaning of reluctant, but also put it into context of their own background knowledge. Okay, let's try another one. Show me what a reluctant broccoli eater would look like. Ooh. So with their face they could show you an answer. Or pretend that you are reluctant to touch a snake. What would you look like? Ew. So the students could answer it verbally or through action, but you're asking them questions. So let's just go back and do a little review. So you're looking at a passage that you're going to have them read, and you want them to have better comprehension. And so you could take out of that passage a few, not a lot, 2 or 3 words that you're going to teach. And first you're going to prepare by getting a student-friendly definition. And after you introduce that definition, then you're going to provide some practice. You could have them generate examples. You could check their understanding using examples or non-examples. Or finally, you could ask them questions that think about it. Now, one thing that I recommend both to teachers and paraeducators is the students keep a log of the words. And I'll just show you an example log where they would have a column where they would write down their word, exhausted, reluctant. And in the next column, record their student-friendly definition, which they could use their own words as long as they could remember it. And then in the following column, maybe make a picture of it, or maybe make an example. So they say reluctant, ooh, don't want to go swimming. That's their example of being reluctant. Or in some cases, they could write a sentence. I was very reluctant to come to the reading class because I was afraid I might make mistakes. So they could write a sentence. So you can make a choice here, a picture, an example, or a sentence. The main thing is that because comprehension is so critical, our vocabulary is so critical to comprehension, we need to be certain that our students understand the words so they have access to the passages that we're going to read with them.